Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to our presentation of Islam in Indonesia, where I'm just going to do a little brief intro. Asad will kind of go into things deeper, but my name is Asri Margono. I'm from the Masjid Istiqlal. We're from the Indonesian American Muslim community. And so just here to talk a little bit about how Islam landed in Indonesia, how it spread into the islands, a little bit how it's how it's permeated into the culture of Indonesia, and where we are now as Indonesian American Muslims here. We have our masjid, so I want to do a little introduction on that. So I'll just get started. So Indonesia is home to the largest Muslim population in the world. Contrary to public beliefs, it's not in the Middle East, it's not in South Asia, and Southeast Asia is actually a thriving Muslim hub. So Indonesia is home to over 240 million Muslims, and we have more than 17,000 islands. So it's very spread out, but it landed, and I have a map, just let me show real briefly. So let me just go over here. You can see the map. Indonesia started here near the coast of Malaysia, the peninsula, and it spread from the west towards the east of the islands. And the reason being because over here we have Asia and the Middle East bringing traders from those lands over to Southeast Asia. So that's where it began, from the west of Indonesia. And they had introduced not only crops and trade wares, but also their values, their culture, and their religion. And the traders were Persian, Gujarati, Arab descent. Most of them are Muslims. So they had introduced those values into the culture. And previous to that, we were predominantly Buddhist and Hindu population. The faith was larger to those, depending on the area, but mostly Hindus and Buddhists. So there was also like larger Hindu population where they were not very happy with the caste system. So Islam coming into being, everybody was welcome, and everybody is the same, equally, and not treated differently. That became kind of a core interest of how the religion has spread. So it has rich traditions of community and hospitality. And there are hundreds of ethnic groups and languages as well. So the fact that they were already very tolerant with all the diverse ethnicities and groups, they were very interested in learning more about from the traders themselves. So and also, contrary to popular belief, there was no waging wars, there was no swords in the introduction of Islam into Indonesia. It was very peaceful through trade and scholarship. And they arrived around the 13th century. And as I mentioned, they were from Persian background, Arab, Gujarati, and some Chinese, in fact, were also, I believe, they had made some research that there were also Chinese Muslims that came into the area. And so one of the most beloved parts about the introduction of Islam in Indonesia is called the Wali Songo lore, the lore of the folklore of the 9 saints, or I would like to refer them more as like scholars. So they were very important in the introduction of Islam through the arts, and also the values that are, within the traditions that were similar to Islamic values. So, for example, we mentioned about the shadow puppets. That was one way to introduce the tenets of Islam, the basics of, the understanding of how Islam is very similar to their beliefs in like family values, and so that made a how do I put it? Made an impact, because that was something they recognized, and it was something that was able to be infused in the arts. and the traditions. And back then, the shadow puppets were a way to communicating news, to the different areas. So that was very impactful, and that made a big difference in how it was spread. So it was very much through cultural values that were instilled.
Does Songo mean 9?
So yes, Songo means 9, correct. Is it similar to a different?
No, it's just Wali means saint, so I wondered
The
that.
9 saints, yes, Wali Songo. So they were from different islands, or they had actually moved from another country, like Persians or background, and so they had stayed to spread da'wah basically into the area. So yeah, there were scholars and community leaders who spread Islam peacefully through education, service, and culture. And they taught Islam with wisdom and compassion. They built schools, they helped communities, and they connect people through the languages, the arts, and the traditions of the area. And this Islam in Indonesia became deeply connected with the community, the hospitality, the learning, and also the respect. Because they saw it completely different in how their faith belief system was, and they were very much interested in how everybody was treated equally, basically. And so today, Indonesia is incredibly diverse, and we are an archipelago. And we're about like 17,000 islands, 5 major ones, but I mean, most of them inhabited. So we're pretty big. And that explains how you were asking previously how it is spread, because population itself is huge. We're about like 89% are Muslims, I believe. The statistics has changed a little bit, because previously it was in the 90% range, but it has declined a little bit. But we have I believe, to be a very tolerant society, and no society is perfect. But it's also instills so much Islam in the culture of Indonesia that it's very common for my friend who's a Catholic to say Salam Alaikum, or like Bismillah, or it's not a rarity at all. And so they're also they celebrate Ramadan, or like Eid rather. It's their national holidays, and so it's there's just that tolerance. Like in a way, it's finding the commonalities. So, and a lot of people find that da'wah to be very peaceful, and also accepted Islam that way, even though. So yeah, there's not really there's of course differences, but there's no friction. I don't believe in the grand scheme of things. It's quite a tolerant society with the different faiths. So the Muslims in Indonesia live alongside people of many different faiths and backgrounds, and the Islamic life there is vibrant. Masjids, Quran classes, charity work, community wheels, and the strong traditions of helping neighbors. And I want to emphasize this, because the helping neighbors part, being very cordial, community-based, family-based, it's very distinct, and we have this culture what we call it gotong royong. Just basically means like a mutual cooperation. We help each other. You want to build a house, we're there. You need help with taking your kids to school. We help each other out, basically. So where everyone contributes together for a greater good, and also that spirit is something that we try to continue at Masjid Istiqlal. And it's the only Indonesian masjid in Texas currently, and it's a welcoming home for diverse communities. We started off at the Indonesian consulate about 10, 11 years ago, and they have a musalla there. So, a group of the Indonesian elders thought we need to have our own space, because we want to do more. We want to invest in the community, foster the community, and introduce Muslims, Indonesian Muslims. Like, maybe some of you have recently heard that, wow, Indonesia is actually the largest Muslim population in the world. So that's our way of introducing ourselves. And so Masjid Istiqlal is in Sugarland, so it's not very far from here, about half an hour away. So you guys, some of you live in Sugarland, come visit us, inshallah. We offer daily prayers, Ramadan iftars, youth and family programs. Currently, we have at this very moment, actually, an active shooter response talk. So this is something we want to engage with the community, doing community outreach. We will have a summer camp, inshallah, for the kiddos. So there's a bunch of things that we're, involved with in the community. We also do collaborations with other masjids. We just had Eid prayer with Sheikh Joe Bradford, and I believe he comes here also to visit. And so we're looking into environmental and volunteer initiatives. We are building a pop-up soon, inshallah, for Muslim businesses, boba, satay or biryani, what have you. Inshallah, we could have those pop-ups available at our masjid. So we just want to create space for unity, community, and belonging, and specifically service also for the neighbors and the the Muslim communities. So one thing we deeply believe is in building bridges instead of silos, and whether through environmental campaigns, community service, interfaith outreach, or simply sharing meals together, we hope to create spaces where people feel welcome, connected, and valued. And so at the end of the day, we hope Masjid Istiqlal can reflect the beauty of both Islam and Indonesian culture with warmth, humility, service, and togetherness. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. So come check us out, istiqlalhouston.org. There's also an app you can download. And then terima kasih. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan. Any questions?
Well, I have a bunch of questions.
Oh, sure.
Inshallah, once I start going through my slides.
I'm curious now, like why Islam spread so much in Indonesia, for example, but I don't know, like to India, like there are similar religious influences, but it didn't take off as much in that region. So I'd be curious as to why that might be.
I think there's like similar family values that resonate well, and previously there were many kingdoms, Hindu kingdoms and Buddhist kingdoms as well. So there was not a sense of unity, perhaps. Their faith beliefs were different, and also for them, a lot had rejected the caste system, and so also traditionally or ethnically, where Polynesians, Melanesians, Chinese and Indians also mixed together, and so I think they were longing for some form of unity, some sense of togetherness, and Islam had offered that. Perhaps it was a sense for them to be more engaged with their spirituality as well, that they couldn't find. And I think there was a lot of feudalism as well, and that was mostly rejected. And we also had the influence or the colonization of the Dutch that came in. So that could have, this was in the 13th century, and the Portuguese first came around the 15th century. So it took a while. It wasn't like, it was a gradual thing. But perhaps it had proliferated because of the Dutch colonization.
I could add to that in my reading in this book. The author does speculate that because the most educated people in that region were Muslim, the Dutch tended to favor their interactions and business dealings with them. So that became proximity to power, and that became another reason for more people to come into the Islamic fold to benefit from the trade. That's what a historian will say, not the charisma of a leader or the truth of the religion.
And I think there's also the fascination with, they didn't have access to education. And that was something like the Nine Saints, the Wali Songo, through their infiltration of the arts, or like the introduction of Islam through the arts and the just the service that they do to the community. They saw that as something, the service including education that is building the school. So that was something that was an out for them to be able to not cling on to the traditions that they disliked, and then adopted the ones that were kind of parallel to what they believe in, and Islam had offered that. So that makes any sense, but I think it could be because of that spread of the community service.
I'm still trying to answer the question myself.
I read this a few years ago, but I was reading that there's also a significance as to why Jakarta is called Jakarta. I think I'm not going to reveal it to everyone, but I think it means the city of victory. Maybe you guys might talk about it. It originates or stems from Jayakarta.
Yes, yes,
And
okay, yes.
It was then called Jakarta by the English or the Dutch or whatever.
The Dutch called it a different name, Batavia. So Jaya means like, I think it's also like maybe Sanskrit based. Jaya is
Sounds like
How is
Jay.
that?
Yeah,
Like it's a-
Jay.
glory. Yeah, like so it's a way of like distinguishing. Like we don't want that name.
I think a famous battle had taken place where the Muslims defended the city from the Hindus, the Dutch, and the Portuguese. That's when I was reading. I think this was in the 1500s or so.
And just the birth of Indonesia itself was through some Muslim scholars. So they really just were trying to gain independence, but because they lacked the education and the know-how and the access to military things, and so I think that kind of made a lot of people want to learn more about the deen.
All right. I want to be mindful of the time. The program's at 9:30. All right. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Rabbana atina min ladunka rahmah wa hayyi' lana min amrina rashada. All right. Thank you very much to the RISE team for inviting me to talk about Islam from the edge. I think when Ustad Safia said RISE is interested in learning about Islam in places that we don't commonly hear about. Typically, we hear about Islam in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Palestine, or in Houston, you hear a lot about the Indo-Pak continent, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan. But I have a few early memories that have always made me interested to explore the Malay archipelago, which today comprises of the modern nation states of Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, and sometimes Philippines. So, but sort of like the historical name, at least in colonial Western literature, it's called the Malay archipelago. So that's the term I will use for today. And I guess, how does Islam spread? We'll start with boba. Where did boba start from? Anyone know? Taiwan. Okay. So, and today, is boba an explicitly Taiwanese experience, or is it global? It's a global phenomenon. It's a global experience. Okay, so how did boba make its way to the Americas? Were there first Taiwanese people who brought boba, and this was their first time coming into America, and then they started selling boba to their, expat community that's just like, oh, we really miss home, we want boba, can you bring boba? And then they're like, some foodie decides to explore it, and then it becomes popular? Or is it that there are Taiwanese people here in America already, and they experience boba when they go visit home, they go to their China street or the little Taiwan section of Chinatown, and they're like, hey, let's bring in boba into our town. It looks like there's enough people here that we can just start selling boba. And then the foodies come, and then they make it popular. So similarly, the sister mentioned a story of trade networks. So that's where we're going to start our discussion. The second memory I have is, in Masjid Farooq, when I was a kid, there was a map that showed colors of different Muslim countries. And the darkest green was like Saudi Arabia. And then this set of islands on the bottom right. And I was like, I never knew that this was the most populous Muslim country in the world. As the sister mentioned, the population, and this is from 2022, is nearly 286 million for the entire country and 250 million number of Muslims. So how did something that is so far away from the center of Islamic empire become the most populous nation of Muslims? Moreover, in all of Islamic history, none of the great Muslim empires ever touched it. Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Safavids, the Fatimids, the Buyids, the Mughals, no great Muslim empire made it here. So I've always been intrigued that, how did this happen? And then the third was, I think somewhere around 2017, I went to the Indonesian consulate in San Francisco for an iftar. And there I was very amused to find imagery and iconography that wasn't, quote unquote, necessarily Islamic. But I found flowers and dragons mixed with Arabic, mixed with Islam. And so there seems to be an indigenous element to the expression and spread of Islam in the Malay archipelago, or as the Hindus historically call it, Nusantara.
Between the islands.
Between the islands.
That's what it means.
That's what it means. Is that used today still?
Yes. Yes.
And does that refer to the modern nation state of Indonesia, or more of a historical collection of?
But there is a movement to make Nusantara the name of the capital or the whole country itself. But I don't know how that's progressed. But yeah, it's still very used commonly.
Yeah. So what can I possibly share with you all that you can't get from ChatGPT on your own? And that. So I'm appreciative that. I'm appreciative that you all challenged me to present something, because this archipelago makes homogeneity very challenging, very difficult. But at the same time, like the sister mentioned, while there is a uniformity in religion, there is certainly not a uniformity in language, not a uniformity in the color, not a uniformity in the religion. The other religions, the 12% or so, is comprised of Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, and even the pre-Islamic, pre-Hindu pagan religions. They still exist to this day. And the most notorious, region has been Papua New Guinea, that has, for some reason, resisted conversion to Islam, even though it's a part of one of the main islands. So really, what I'm going to hope to do is to give you tools to study different cultures. In Western academia, we look at cultures from the perspective of literature, from the perspective of art, from the perspective of architecture, economics, politics. And so that's sort of some of the tools that I'll be using to go through historic Nusantara. So the sister mentioned that the spread of Islam begins with the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And it's very disorienting to talk about Indonesia if you don't have a sense of where Indonesia is. So we'll zoom out to the center, or the beginning of Islam, which is in Mecca, which is down here somewhere. Right? Where's Mecca? Here we go. So Islam spreads. It already has existing trade networks between Yemen, the coastal town, up to Syria, into Western Europe. And this is the 7th century. But what's existing already is a network historically called the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And it's from Yemen, Persia, India, Sri Lanka, and this island right here, known as historically Sumatra. It also connects to Somalia, or Eritrea, comes down to Madagascar, South Africa. So you have Muslims all over. Now, traditionally, this network, the way the origins of Islam is taught is that Muslims came to Sumatra and spread Islam and married the women and became part of the local languages. But I have an alternative theory that is why I started the story about boba. My thought is that even before Islam came, you had ports here in Aceh, in the Malabar Straits, in Java, of Yemeni cousins, of Indian cousins that have created their business ports. And just like boba, somewhere around the 8th or 9th century, one of their cousins comes to town and he's like, hey, I'm Muslim now. And they're like, what is Islam? Tell us more. And so they bring their preachers. And in those towns, just like in little Chinatown or little Taiwan town, now everybody wants boba. Similarly, Islam is an export to an expat community that is already existing there. So an alternative theory that I would have to do a lot more research on.
It could also mean that there were natural resources that were available in Indonesia they were very interested in. So they wanted to bring that back, and there was that.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And yes, it's a reflexive relationship. So I want to get a little bit comfortable with the map before talking a little bit more details. So when we look at Indonesia, it is made up of 17,000 islands, but 5 major ones: Sumatra, Java, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and which one is the 5th one?
Irian.
This one?
Yes, half of Papua New Guinea, and the other side is Indonesian Irian.
Irian. Okay. Very good. So you can see how spread apart it is. Then you have Malaysia. Malaysia is 2 parts. It's right here, and Kuala Lumpur is here. And then you have Sarawak. And then you have this small country, or the kingdom of Brunei, which only got its freedom from the British in like 1985. So as for why this region isn't one country, I just started studying. My thought is it has to do with colonization, that what is Indonesia today was colonized by the Dutch. What is Malaysia today was colonized by the British, and Brunei was colonized by the British. Indonesia gets its independence in 1949. 45? Okay. Oh, was there some struggle with the Japanese? 45, yes. And then it was full until 1949. Malaysia gets its independence in the 1950s, 1957. Singapore actually declares independence from Malaysia in the 1960s, and Brunei gets its independence in the 1980s. So are we all feeling a little bit oriented towards this area and where it is in the world? Because we're going to talk a lot. And when I was reading, I was like, where is this? Where are all these kingdoms? So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at a historical map of the different kingdoms across time to get a sense of the changes that this part of the world goes through. So you can see here that in around the 12th century, this is where you have Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms that are a part of this world. And when we move forward, you see in 1200, the Kedah Sultanate, that's the first Muslim empire, the first Muslim kingdom or the rulership that has taken power. Now, as the sister mentioned, most of Muslim development or Muslim settlement happens on the west side because it has the most oft frequented Muslim traders. But she also mentioned, because the Umayyads did send ulama to China, that you were having some Muslims coming through China as well. Then you see sort of the height of the Muslim empire. This was around, let's say, yeah, here we go. You have several major Muslim kingdoms. You have the Aceh Sultanate, which most of the books I read, they say, well, if you want sort of a blueprint of pre-colonial Islamic, like Malaysian archipelago, this was sort of like the representation of proper Islamic learning and the development of the culture. You had the Demak Sultanate, the Sultanate of Goa, the Sultanate of Brunei, and I think there was one other major one that I read about. But
Demak, maybe.
Demak, Java, yeah. So as you can see, sometimes there's a history of Muslims, kingdoms collaborating with each other. Sometimes they partner with Hindu kingdoms to fight with Buddhists. Sometimes Muslim allies with a Hindu kingdom to fight a Muslim kingdom. So notions of identity or notions of being Muslim were different than the way we see it. Then, 1600 onwards, this is where you see the changing of the kingdoms, but also the eventual takeover of Java by the Dutch, who started doing business around 1600. And then over time, they created ports, they created forts around their ports, and eventually sort of colonized the region. But I don't have as much time to get into that. So let's just to talk about, what was there for Indonesia to benefit from in this Indian Ocean trade network, but also to give. So from Indonesia, you got pepper,
Clove, pepper,
nutmeg, cloves,
yeah.
mace,
Mhm.
and in exchange they were receiving cloth, silver, ivory, according to this map. But you can see how a lot of world history textbooks, they saw that we go from a world that is independent to a world that is interconnected, and this is very much an interconnected world where not only is there the exchange of goods, but also the exchange of ideas, the exchange of peoples, because there's a slave trade as well, servants, and through this network, ulama are being sent to different Muslim hubs. And part of your question, answering your question about the success of Indonesia, this book that I recommend, The Preaching of Islam by Sir Thomas Arnold, he was actually Allama Iqbal's tutor, one of his tutors. He talks about the peaceful preaching of Islam throughout the world. And I haven't seen a more consistent campaign of dawah for over 1,000 years than the Indonesian archipelago. I think other kingdoms, especially the Muslim empires, they get a little bit distracted from resource extraction and wealth and taxing the non-Muslims so that they can get more taxes and not converting them so that they don't lose tax revenue. I've never seen a part of the world that focused really on converting its people, so that's a distinct feature that I can't compare it to the other parts of the Muslim world. So anyone who is interested in a sort of periodization, this is kind of a basic periodization that I've set forth, and we're going to kind of go into the Islamization era. There's a classical era in which there are pagans, Hindus, Buddhists, the Islamization era from the 13th to the 17th centuries, the colonial era, which sort of intertwines with the Islamization era. And, if you're interested, there's one Orientalist scholar who really impacts the place of the Dutch, but also how Islam ends up looking the way it does today in Indonesia. He became Muslim, but at the same time, he was a servant of the Dutch Empire. So there were some things that he did to harm the Indonesians, but some things to forever, I guess, modernize or change the Indonesia the way it is. And then, of course, the modern nation states of Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Brunei, it was 1949 onwards. So these countries are not even 100 years old, and still developing their notion of nationality and citizenship, but they're part of this very rich and old culture as well. So, preachers and traders. To answer your question, preachers and traders. The spread of this faith over so vast a portion of the globe is due to various causes, social, political, and religious. But among these, one of the most powerful factors at work in the production of this stupendous result has been the unremitted labors of Muslim missionaries. Moreover, it is not in the cruelties of the persecutor or the fury of the fanatic that we should look for the evidences of the missionary spirit of Islam, any more than in the exploits of that mythical personage, the Muslim warrior with sword in one hand and Quran in the other. But while that is true, and he's saying that is part of the history, but rather it is in the quiet, unobtrusive labors of the preacher and the trader who have carried their faith into every quarter of the globe. Moreover, and this is Arnold referring specifically to the Malaysian peninsula, their long intercourse with the Arabs and the Muslims of the east coast of India has made them very rigid observers of their religious duties, and they have the reputation of being the most exemplary Mohammedans, he's writing in 1896, exemplary Mohammedans of the archipelago. At the same time, their constant contact with the Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, and pagans of their own country has made them liberal and tolerant. So a lot of what the sister is mentioning of what Indonesia looks like today has been the case for thousands of years, or over 1,000 years now. So major takeaways from Arnold's section on the Malay archipelago. This is a really good book. I highly recommend it to everybody. He's focused. He's in a time when Muslims are being portrayed in the West as Islam is being spread by the sword. He's very early, in 1896, talking about the peaceful preaching of Islam in places like West Africa, Malaysia, India, Spain, Russia, Bosnia. You'd be surprised how long Muslims have been in these places that we've never heard about. So his major takeaways is that first, this history is challenging. Mostly it's unrecorded and chronicles by travelers like Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo, and officials and missionaries. They're fragmentary and incomplete. The second is that there's the success of the traders. And going back to y'all's question, first was adopting the local language. The sister mentioned there are 17,000 different languages. Whenever they established themselves, they learned the local language so that they could start communicating in the local vernacular as opposed to the other way around. Converting the native women that they married. All right, this is kind of natural. It wasn't, Khalid from Yemen moves to Malaysia and he's just there alone. He gets lonely, so he gets married and he converts the wife. Then they start having children that are Muslim, as well as that they have servants and slaves, business partners and slaves. They start talking to each other through the human connection of teaching the religion. Third was melting into the mass of the population through skillful compromises in the doctrines and practices. Now, this is a thorny problem that I'd love to hear more about, or a thorny tension in Indonesia that we see in any edge community of the Muslim world, is the adoption of local practices before sort of like a systematic Sharia compliant religion. And so you're going to have things that come into the religion, because when people accepted Islam, these are pre-literate societies. Right? The world literacy rate in 1915 was 15%. So most people didn't learn by going to schools. They learned through art. They learned through conversation. And they learned in a way that Muslims accommodated themselves to the local customs and the practices. So some of the early books, they have Yusuf alayhi salam interacting with like Shiva and like the local deities of the Hindu communities, and they would teach precepts of the religion, the values, the theology through storytelling, in stories that were familiar to them already, and adding new characters. So imagine, I don't know, imagine watching Breaking Bad, right? And like in the new rendition of Breaking Bad, they have this like Muslim DEA agent, and this Muslim DEA agent is just part of the show, and it's general entertainment. But slowly, people are learning. Oh, this is what a Muslim is, right? He's not a cocaine, or what do they do? Meth. He's not a meth cooker. He's on the side of the right, and he's going out. And oh, he's doing this because it's in his religion. So fourth is professional missionaries. They're theologians, preachers, jurists, pilgrims, to stir up more consistent religious life and purging away the lingering remains of heathen habits. Again, he's a man of his time. Heathen is referring to pagans. But, I saw some videos in which still there are elements of Hindu practice that is still part of like a Muslim community, and I'd love to hear more about it, because I saw a healthy tension of that from the start. But when empires would collapse, like the Umayyad Empire or the Abbasid Empire or the Mughal Empire didn't collapse until World War II ended. But anytime a center collapses, theologians and scholars lose patronage. They lose their financing, their source of income. So then they go and travel to other kingdoms. And so if you remember that highway that existed already, they would just jump on and they say, hey, I hear great things about what's going on with the kingdoms in Indonesia. And so they would go, they would marry, they would learn the language, and then they would bring more reform, because there was a dearth of Islamic knowledge in these edge regions. Fifth is an emphasis on Hajj as a major source of education and reform. From the start, we see Indonesia emphasizing a connection with Mecca, as well as the major learning centers in the Muslim world, namely Cairo today. Today, and even in the past, during the Mamluk dynasty, the Fatimid dynasties, whatever, they always sent people, and Hajj became a way to learn the religion, because back then, it wasn't just like a 2-week trip. Back then, it took a year to perform Hajj. And so in the process, you're meeting pilgrims along the road, you're learning the religion, you go to Hajj, there's scholars from all over the world, you stay there for a couple of months afterwards even, and then you come back. And so this helps with the teaching of the religion. 6 is a major connection of Malays and Indonesians in Mecca and Cairo to maintain authentic connection with Islam. When I was in Cairo, the most serious students were from Malaysia and Indonesia. They just took it to another level. Sada Safia mentioned that in a major Muslim country, you're going to have a competition to get into the best Islamic schools, and getting into Al-Azhar is sort of like getting into the Ivy League. So it was like the cream of the crop that ended up in Cairo. There is a constant communication with their fellow countrymen in their native land, and their efforts have been largely effectual in purging Mohammedanism in the Malay archipelago from the contamination of heathen customs and modes of thought that have survived from an earlier period. 7 is that in the 19th and 20th centuries, especially with the funding of the Wahhabi movement in Saudi Arabia, as well as the Salafi movement in Cairo, you have an increase in the madrasas in the 19th and 20th centuries. And then also, I'm going to get into it, but we cannot ignore the influence and impact of the Sufi tariqas in the Malay archipelago, namely the Shatiri, the Qadiri, the Naqshbandi, the Khalwati, and the Rifa'i Sufi tariqas, according to these texts. So the book that I really recommend, it's kind of like a master's level book, but The Making of Indonesian Islam It's by a Princeton professor. Orientalism and the Narration of a Sufi Past. Really good book to recommend. And then a third book I recommend, which is more of like to learn how to study a Muslim community on the edge, is Richard Bullitt's Islam, A View from the Edge. So the sister mentioned the Wali Songo, the 9 saints of Java. These 9 men they're mythical, but at the same time historical. And they aren't just preachers, but part of answering the question of the success of Islam in Indonesia is the dawah technique of these 9 men who sort of were apart for about maybe 200 years. They're not all at the same time. They sort of represent a pantheon of the great Muslims of Indonesian, Malaysian history that for various reasons, I think the whole Muslim world should study as a model for dawah. So I'll give you an example. I can't remember who specifically, but these saints who were religious men, they also had tech, right? Like Asher's like, what, tech? They were masters of their premier technology of their time. They would, in the back of their heart, they're da'is, but at the same time, they're business people. So they'll go into a local Hindu or Buddhist kingdom and they'll say, I am a master of deforestation. You've got all this land that you can't do anything with. I can turn it into productive agricultural land. And the king is like, well, great, that's more money for me. I've got a bunch of peasants that aren't doing anything. And then but one of these saints will stipulate in their contract that in exchange for this, that a jami' or a mosque must be built. There's no Muslims in the area, but the strategy is when you build a jami', it creates another station for the network of da'is traveling and preaching the religion. Moreover, the peasants as well as the kingdoms are so grateful for the economic prosperity that they bring to the region that they are already predisposed to accepting the religion because of the benefit that they brought to the community. Another is the adaptation of local art, the local, one of the videos that we're going to watch, and I'm going to go over time, so if you all need to leave, go ahead, is the use of shadow puppets. Shadow puppets were something from India that made it to the archipelago, and it was a means of telling stories, teaching values that these da'is adapted. Moreover, it was the poetry of the region in the local vernaculars that they adapted. They learned the language and they infused Islamic teaching into the religion or into the teaching. So, kind of like if you guys are wanting a series of, I would probably look at every culture from these particular characteristics of how people are and how Islam sort of infuses or expresses itself in the indigenous aspect. So architecture, fashion, Sufism, it's not for everyone, but shadow puppets in the Indonesian context, the Quran, nasheeds, music, institutes of learning. Our Ustada Safia went to IIUM. Film, food, we had some foods today. Notions of gender, so Ustada Safia and I have talked about, especially the women in Indonesia, they don't kind of fit into our perception of a Muslim woman in Arab world or Pakistani world. There is still this shyness and this modesty, but at the same time, they're ambassadors and queens and world leaders at the same time. And then, I always observed that they were never a part of a major Islamic empire. So they were sort of safe from the drama of the British and the Crusades. And at the same time, they're the largest Muslim country in the world. So let's see, what do I have first? Architecture. Okay, so Muslims, they adapted themselves to the local architecture styles. This style, does it look like a masjid? Right? It actually looks more like a Hindu temple or a Buddhist temple. And these triangles, they have certain meaning of a mountain, of certain layers of reality that we aspire to get to the top reality. So they adopted that local architecture style. And my guess is that because there's mention of mountain in the Quran, in Islam, is to take that imagery and to give it new meaning, Islamic meaning. So you see a couple more, 16th century masjid.
Actually, in the shadow puppet imagery, the mountain is one of the predominant like backdrop to that. So it's considered like clouds and mountains.
Yeah, mashallah. Well, yeah, we're going to watch one. Let's see, 16th century, following the Hindu-Buddhist style of the Majapahit era. Majapahit is where today Jakarta and Java. So we start seeing domes. We see these pillars. Sultan of Ternate Mosque in North Maluku, 17th century. Yes.
Is there any influences from like the pyramids of like Egypt and other areas based off of how they wanted to do the triangles? Like any similarities in their thought? Like the triangle, like the pyramid, like the top is like to reach God or something. I forgot what the pyramids had, but was there a similar belief system that they had?
You'd have to go into the annals of history to find the connection. Yeah. Yep.
In your research, did you come across any historical accounts of people traveling to these Indonesian kingdoms, Muslim Indonesian kingdoms?
Yeah.
Like Ibn Battuta, I think he was.
Yeah, there's one named Hamza Fansuri.
Okay.
And then there's a famous preacher named Nurullah or Nuruddin.
Mhm.
Nuruddin, who was he made a bit of an impact, and he was out-debated by another theologian. And it actually has to do with these very arcane, like mystical, like philosophical debates that he lost his patronage to the kingdom. I'm not getting into that, but basically they're formed a sort of higher, more philosophical religion amongst the court and the kings, and they kind of wanted a more standard Islam. I have a lot more information in my head than I can like coherently explain right now. So
I have another question too.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that about the 9 saints.
Mhm.
Were those 9 saints? I mean, are they in terms of like Islamic scholarhood, like are they similar to the examples of Imam Bukhari and of those scholars from the far regions of the Muslim Empire?
No, in that they're not sole scholars.
Okay.
They are scholars in the sense that they've read books of Aqidah, books of fiqh. By the way, what is the dominant madhab in the archipelago?
Hanbali.
The Shafi'i madhab.
Yeah.
Why? Yemen. Okay. What else? Where are the Shafi'is in India? They're along the coast as well. Where is Yemen? It's along the coast. And these islands in Indonesia, do they have a lot or not that much coastal land? Right. And which madhab says that shellfish are makruh?
Hanafi.
The Hanafi, right? So even though you have a lot of Hanafis that are probably traveling through the region, nobody's like, I don't want to be Hanafi, I want to eat my shellfish. Right? So historically, it's Shafi'is that end up being coastal, like the coastal Muslims end up being Shafi because of this fishy situation.
I was going to ask about what you think about it being islands affecting how Islam was spread as well. So that's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yep.
And I think so like the Wali Songas were more like employers of the kingdoms in a way, like they were the scholars, like resident scholar, you may say. So like if we were to spread the dawah, how they were the ones to counsel, I suppose. Not all, but some of them for the Muslim kingdoms would seek their counsel for like as an employer of sorts.
You see them writing commentaries on some major texts of Aqidah and fiqh that come from Cairo, like al-Barahin, like Imam al-Shafi's texts on the madhab, Imam al-Nawawi's texts on the Shafi madhab. And then you also do have some original ideas coming from Indonesia about Islam, but for whatever reason did not leave that region or take off in that region. One idea being that Allah's soul is the world and the world's soul is Allah's, which is like a very hot take for this like Salafi context that we're in. But that was like a unique idea that this author mentions. Ibn al-Arabi's cosmology and his tasawwuf was influential in the region, but over time Imam al-Ghazali's and his take on Sufism really takes over the Malay archipelago, and probably the greatest readers and like expounders of Imam al-Ghazali come from Malaysia and Indonesia. Yeah. You have one person named Sayyid Naqib al-Atas who just recently passed away. Rahimahullah, he's a scholar worth exploring from the Malay archipelago. So yeah, you see some Indian influence, and then later on now you start seeing some European influence. The Al-Azhar Great Mosque, some grand mosques that this looks like Turkish influence to me. So yeah, and if you were to go to Malaysia, one of the things to do is to do a mosque tour of Malaysia and Indonesia, because they've just taken architecture to another level when it comes to their mosques.
What masjid was that? The one that looked futuristic?
This one?
Yeah, that one.
Grand Mosque of West Sumatra, completed in 2014.
That's actually reminiscent of their traditional house. The Rumah Gadang has those curves. So that could
so
be-
they've taken architecture to another level where they not only are experimenting with new styles, but kind of like neoclassical, they are taking traditional and turning it to something new. So I think architecture is one of the ways that Islam is embedded into their culture. The second is fashion. So the traditional batik pattern is a pre-Islamic pattern that makes it still popular. And what I'm wearing today, some of the iconography, you wouldn't imagine that this is like a Muslim dominant culture because it's got peacocks on it and feathers that look, Indian. But you see different examples of it over time. Men wear it, women wear it. These beautiful, beautiful patterns that have lots of meaning in them. They take elements of nature, elements of geometry, elements of Islamic theology even, and it's in the patterns, it's embedded in these patterns.
So like very geometric and like the Islamic arts. You have the illumination sorts, so it's very similar to that as well.
Yep. I feel like each one of these things we're going to talk about, you could take a whole semester course on them. So we're just going to do an overview, a gloss of these things.
I've never seen this type of Indonesian art.
It's wax on fabric. So batik itself, it's from the Javanese language, means from two words, amba titik. So it's like putting dots. It's basically like wax dots, and then you create patterns.
Right. So this is very different from our, even as Western, like American Muslims, and our notion of what is an Islamic art. This is very different. It really challenged me, because we are starting to form our own notion of what is Islamic, but this is its own thing.
Even the idea of women's clothing seems so different.
It's very colorful.
Yeah.
Very colorful. One of the things that I benefited from, like a teacher explained to me, is that Islam doesn't come with a culture. Islam isn't a culture, but rather it's a prism through which you pass your culture, and it beautifies it, it adorns it, it purifies it in a certain way. It makes it Sharia compliant, so to speak. But even some of them, still though, you'll still have Hindus and Buddhists expressing their values and their ideas through this fashion this form. The second is the predominance of tasawwuf. And so you have massive gatherings of hundreds of thousands of people, in the Naqshbandi Tariqa, in the Shatiri Tariqa, in the Qadiri Tariqa. Especially there's a connection with Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah. And so we'll just listen to some.
صلي عليه وسلم اللهم صل على سيد محمد اللهم صل عليه وسلم اللهم سيدنا محمد اللهم صل عليه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد اللهم.
And so they just do this for an hour straight, but you can see the number of people that come together.
أستغفر الله العظيم أستغفر الله.
And so I've presented something that is, okay, very few people are going to debate this, but some elements, some of the Sufi tariqas that give a bad rep to Sufi, the tasawwuf especially, is those who have gone outside the bounds of the Sharia. And so you will see prostrating towards the beer. You'll see like the burning of certain incense, which doesn't look like it belongs to Islam. And that's sort of the tension that I talked about, that elements of pre-Islamic culture remain in the Islamic expression in Indonesia and Malaysia. And this is the same tension you see in Indo-Pak, that even though you have all sorts of reform movements and scholars, there is still an attachment to the local practices, the local alim, and that's just a bit of human nature to get connected to what you grew up with, what gave you peace or what gave you catharsis. So it's a thorny problem to overcome. Okay, the shadow puppets. So this is not an Islamic shadow puppet. This is sort of how it is in a non-Islamic context, and then we'll show one.
What powers lie in the hands of invisible gods?
Guayam, the play of shadows, is a distant survival of ancestor worship, the old faith of the islands. Behind a linen screen, an unseen puppet master tells stories of heroes and kings. The figures are at once hidden and revealed. It is a kind of invocation, controlled by the ritual magic of music and language. The spirit world appears in a benign and even pleasure-giving form.
From where he stood, the son of the wind god saw.
So in our context, especially in this, I'm like a very open critic of like any iconoclastic movement that just like destroys any local culture and then brings some form of Islam that is not American. I imagine that kind of force would just say, oh, this is shirk. We can't do anything with it. But again, those Wali Songo, they were smart. They were intelligent to look at, okay, this is how people learn. So why don't we adapt to this? And so you see even today, the use of this, where you have a narrator telling the story using shadow puppets.
Kula aturi mengakaken dhateng penggali panjenengan. Tulis ing papan wonten kelenging pustaka menika yakti wonten ing agami kula sinebut kalimat tauhid.
Kalimat tauhid.
Putri sulasipun kados mekaten. Asyhadu alla ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Monggo. Kula aturaken dhateng menapa sampun kula aturaken.
So you can see how in the minds of people who are like, imagine seeing like a Marvel like movie, right? And Captain America just says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Like how impactful that would be for Americans. Like that now Islam isn't something that's foreign. It's not something that it's only Arabs and brown people and it's this is from here. Then you have nasheeds. The Wali Songo were pros at poetry and singing, and in a context where they saw that there were peasants in the farm on the farms that needed songs to sing, and they were already singing songs while doing their daily labor, and to get past the time, they would start singing about whatever they were taught, and infused in those songs was like some very deep theology, aspects of the religion. The women would sing at home doing their chores, and the children would learn the deen that way as well. So I grew up hearing about Rayhan. I don't know if there are some other major Nasheed artists.
It sounds like something familiar. This is based on Suhbah.
This what? This is what? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, so like nobody, you don't realize you're learning a tafsir of Surah Al-Asr. You're just being entertained, and people are singing it. What is? Dami Masan? Wal Asr. Yeah, I think the person who did this best in America was Dawood Warren's. I think when you listen to his songs, it's just like, whoa, it's some deep stuff.
Did we see similar integrations of Islam into art and culture during the Prophet's
In his context, they were Arab nomads, desert, like they didn't have cult. They had a rich memorization and poetry, poetic culture. So the words that they were using in their poetry would emerge in the Quran, and they're like, we know this word, but the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran is using it differently. So let's see what else did I find.
So is this like a dialect everyone understands? Because I know you were saying there's different languages.
Yeah. This
is there like one common?
It's the basis is Malay. So between the islands, it's commonly understood, but there's been influences or like absorption of other languages as well, depending on where the region is or where your island is. But the basis is pretty understandable for most of the islands.
Another thing that Usada Safia mentions to me in her years in Malaysia, she's still trying to figure out, and maybe you all can help us, is the question that we raised before, is that the women, they wear the hijab, they have the modesty, the shyness, but at the same time, they're successful in the arts and politics and business, whereas there is this, at least in the way Islam is presented in the West, it's like, oh, that's not possible for a woman to be practicing and like committed to the religion, and then also because there's this like bias that you're suppressed or you're oppressed.
Yeah, it's fairly acceptable for women to go to most fields. Like my great grandmothers fought like literally they engaged in warfare. they were defending their land. It was not. I mean, not everybody did. I mean, everybody had their roles, but it's not uncommon for women to actually defend their homeland and join the battlefield. Because I mean, you have the Suhbah bin Ka'b too. You know, you have these famous sahabas. You know, like, so it's not an an unthinkable thing.
The last thing is a film. I think to understand a culture is to watch their movies, and I thought this one was good because it tells you about the various resistance movements during the Dutch's colonization. And this particular character, he created a resistance movement of over 2 million Muslims. And he used collective bargaining or what are they called today? Unions. He unionized all of the Muslim workers and he created collective bargain. And that really crippled the Dutch who couldn't meet their quotas unless they met their demands. So
they're very famous.
yeah, okay. It was very hard to go over 1,000 years of history, but what we attempted to do today is to just give you clues and hints to. I mentioned to Ustad Safia, I was like, I really need someone from Indonesia to make sure and verify everything I'm saying, but then also to give us that like connection. So I'm glad they mentioned Masjid Istiqlal, because if you're truly curious to get a feel for their success, and their success isn't a success for the Ummah, and that the many lessons that they can offer to all over the world, but here, especially in America, I think they take the more diplomacy approach. Me at CARE, I'm like in your face and like fighting all the time. So, okay, Jazakallah khairan, everyone. I know that I went way over time, but you all stayed. I allowed you to leave earlier.
Thank you so much for
Thank you. Thank you so much. You should come to Masjid Istiqlal, inshallah.
Inshallah. I came during Ramadan, and I know
to do a talk. That would be
sure.
really
And
interesting.
now I have this slideshow now.
Yeah, we could.
Are y'all open for questions, by the way?
Sure. I am. I don't know.
Yeah,
Does
sure.
anyone have questions? Okay, well, I guess
Do you
not.
have anything like this at the Masjid Istiqlal, like any?
Or
Actually, the Indonesian consulate has a mini exhibition corner, and so it shows like the many different islands, and I think Islam is, because we're predominantly Muslim, is very much the identity as well. So it's not extensive. The history is not extensive, but it has some, different portions of how it has spread into Indonesia and a little bit of the history.
Maybe Brother Imran can give a presentation. You can give a presentation there.
no, I'm not Indonesian. That I'd feel shy.
Istiqlal would
I'd
be
feel shy
more than
to do.
happy to have Brother Imran, inshallah. Yeah, we could
Inshallah.
definitely.
We grew up with that.
Two questions. Why is Masjid? What's the meaning of Istiqlal?
Istiqlal.
Because it's a very big masjid in Jakarta.
Yes.
And then I think it was the
We voted on that being like the first masjid that was, I guess, the biggest in Southeast Asia then. And so it was actually built by a Catholic architect. So it kind of showed also the religious, unity that we have.
Is this it?
Yes, that's it. That's it. So it's right next door to cathedral. So you hear the azan, and then you might hear church bells right after. So, but we have like gazillion masjids in the area too. So the azan is just,
But look how grand the interior is.
There is.
You all know about Islamic Arts Society in Houston? Islamic Arts Society, check them out, follow them on social media. They have an annual exhibition
Yeah.
in November.
It's not really big. They used to start at Masjid al-Salam, I think. Now it's at U of H, so it's pretty big. Like,
I have a quick comment.
Well, he's got his second question.
Oh, okay.
So
Sure.
a second question I wanted to ask was, is there an Indonesian Muslim travel group from Houston? Perhaps maybe one should open.
inshallah, maybe I will start one.
Oh,
That
it
would
would be
be-
a good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like visiting Southeast Asia, like going to Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore,
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Thailand. Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing.
Not that I know of, but
Like trying out all the different food.
Suhbah can do it.
Maybe Suhbah.
Suhbah Adventures, partnered with Masjid Istiqlal.
let's do it, inshallah. Yeah.
It's like what's crazy is like the flight ticket will cost a lot, but the living expenses are a lot cheaper than any other. Like if you go to Japan or
Food's
Korea,
halal
places.
and everybody's masjids everywhere, so yeah.
But that would be amazing.
Inshallah.
Did you have any follow?
That was my question.
Okay. But the thing, what's amazing is how like how Islam came to the Indonesian region because of family values and stuff of that, and akhlaq and like character. And what's amazing is the first time I went to Istiqlal Masjid, I think it was like during Ramadan, one of the first few times, and I felt welcomed more than any other masjid. And Istiqlal Masjid is one of the most welcoming masjids. Islam in Spanish is the other one, and so it really shows that the spirit of Islam didn't die in Indonesia. It has been coming through, and it came to the West through you guys.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah, inshallah. We'll hope to foster that, inshallah.
Ramadan iftars are very special. Years ago, I went for the first time, and I was surprised.
Alhamdulillah.
May Allah bless you. and your
Ameen,
community.
ameen, ameen. Thank
I've
you so much.
always felt like in my 4 years in Malaysia, I've always shared with people that it is so strange to find an entire country with like beautiful akhlaq.
Subhanallah.
And you see that in the community here as well. Like, I've been to various Muslim countries and you see some nice and welcoming people and some harsh people and some corruption here and some, really strong version of Islam here, whatever it may be. I went to Malaysia when I was first 14, just visiting with my family. And I remember when I left there, I said, this is such a beautiful country. I wish I could come back. And there was just something there that feel like, as a Muslim, you feel like you're home in that area. And so it's such a beautiful community that you guys.
I think it's just like Islam has helped maybe in this, but there's so many hardships, challenges of colonialism and, the invasion from different, foreign powers. And so I think they've managed to just smile through it all. Everybody just like the tawakkul part, I think maybe has a lot to do with that as well. Like,
I don't think people should make the mistake of mistaking kindness for meekness or like the softness for being pushovers. That movie really shows that with excellent character, you can still strong people. Indonesian are pretty.
I don't know if I have another Indonesian here and 2 half Indonesians, so I don't know if they have anything to add to that. What they no. Oh, mashallah.
I just see it. I really see like that area and that practice as a model Muslim country. It feels like Islam is natural there and not forced and not being left behind. It's just it's like the color of the country, the ambiance of the country is Islam. Like Islam is their culture. And so I've never seen a country that it feels that way.
I mean, nothing's perfect, but I think we've managed to just kind of persevere, and I think the presence of Islam has definitely fostered that, just like seeing things, the bright side of things, and just struggling through, and just being able to make the best of things. Alhamdulillah. So.
Maybe I'm just seeing it from an outsider's perspective. I know every time I say it to even in Malaysia, they're like, "Oh, we have our problems."
Yeah. That's a very Malay thing. Like,
Compared to any other Muslim country I've been to, I feel like
You guys have got it.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair.
Continue to put barakah
Ameen,
in
ameen,
that
ameen.
land and in the people, and allow you guys to benefit this community. I
Ameen.
know that everybody who's ever been to Masjid Istiqlal says the same thing as Usher. Oh
Subhanallah.
my gosh, how have you not been here before?
Come, please. Come.
They start adopting
We'll
it
get,
as
we'll
their local-
have more sati for you. Yeah. Inshallah.
We need a travel group. So.
Okay, noted. I will jot that down,
We're
inshallah.
first on the
Yeah.
list.
Okay.
For us. Okay.
Yeah, the sign up sheet is right here. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay. Thanks for co-presenting.
Oh, thank you.
Are you on the board there? Or an
Yeah,
organizer?
currently, yeah.
Currently,
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Audi and his family, they come to our masjid. And Katie,
Yes. Audi was the past president.
yeah,
So, yeah.
and his brother
Zeph.
Zeph. We were in high school at the same time.
Oh, mashallah,
He's 2
really?
years younger than me.
Okay. Audi and Farhan's best buddies. They're good friends.
Okay. Yeah, he was coming to our masjid for Qiyam al-Layl.
I mean, I used to live close over there, so I just go.
Yeah. Okay.